Hello everyone, this is Mike with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game. Coming back at you with a second video of the art of game mastering. Here is the game in question, Savage Kingdoms. I've showed this before in several videos of all 25 people watching it or whatever. There's the cool logo, cool rulebook for game masters and players. And there's the back of the book, etc. Imprint, logo, ISBN number, all that good official stuff. And you could pick this up on Amazon.com. I've mentioned it before, but just real quick, Amazon.com, $21, or contact me personally. I can see if I can get you one for at least roughly the same. Otherwise, you can pick it up here in a couple of game shops here in Asheville, that's, North Carolina. That's about as far as I've gotten with distribution, just local. And they're $24.95 MSRP. There. The PDF is also on DriveThruRPG, as well as the PDF to this SK to the Savage Bestiary, which is not out in a physical copy quite yet. Haven't really been able to afford the artwork and such, but it is a good PDF. 100 pages of NPC stats, templates, and some more creatures that didn't make the cut of the core rulebook, which is most of them, because in a core rulebook you only want a smattering, a taste of creatures, and then more of the common ones at that. So this video is about the art of game mastering Savage Kingdoms in particular. The last one was just some advice such that I could give beyond what's already out there, which is some amazing stuff on YouTube, some really good GMing advice and storytelling and narration advice. But hopefully, as a gamer of 35 years and having done a little game design myself, and as an actor, I'm hoping that I'm bringing some new stuff, or at least elaborating more on what's already been said. So check out the last video for more generic game mastering advice, such that it is. Alright, so this is game mastering Savage Kingdoms particular. So if you have this book, and you're a follower of the game, hopefully, yay for you, first of all. Awesome, thanks for supporting Fire in the Head Productions. The first thing in the game mastering section, it starts on page 289. So it's pretty much the last chapter. There's optional rules and game mastering advice in general. And I'll just kind of go through them fairly quickly. Now, most likely I'll just get through half of these, and I'll end up probably doing part 3, which will finish it up, because I can either do a 35-40 minute video of just kind of hitting a skeleton of things, which I'm not sure is particularly useful, or what I prefer to do is hit on, go through half of this chapter, spend a little more detail on all of it. Now, a lot of it's, the writing is there. It's fairly detailed, but there's some things that no doubt I left out or didn't think of or got edited out just for brevity. So I'll just kind of touch on some of that. All right, so the first thing, game mastering Savage Kingdoms. First, let it be known that it was designed to be more of an immersive style. And I know that term gets bandied about, and some people grumble about it, and others think that's awesome, and others don't really care, and that's fine, and that's totally fair, because honestly, any game can be about as immersive as you want it. However, also on the other hand, certain games are designed specifically to be more immersive. There are certain rules that support it. There are certain thematics that are brought out. The writing, even in the book, is evocative of more of an immersive setting. Whereas other settings are more written and therefore designed to be a little more beer and pretzel style, which is totally fine. Neither method is any better than the other. But I personally prefer a slightly more immersive style. It's probably because I'm an actor and I like storytelling, and I've always liked to perform, and I like mythology, and I like fairly serious, gritty tales within reason. I mean, we all like to cut up and crack up. I do comedy improv professionally, and so yeah, I can be completely silly, but when it comes to particularly Savage Kingdoms, or really most any games, even when I've run a little bit of D&D 5th edition recently, which is actually a pretty decent system. Even though D&D always has kind of a knock against it for not being the most immersive of games, and quite honestly, I kind of agree. I think it can still be added with those particular game master style, and which is what I try to do. So even when I run that system, I try to make it fairly immersive and even a little bit grittier, although I can make it a little bit lighter without going against the theme. Savage Kingdoms here, if you try to go a little lighter or not immersive, it'll still work. It's fine, do it, but it's not quite geared that way. It's almost like trying to run World of Darkness with all Kinder player characters or something. It's probably, the thematics are just kind of a little strange. So just keep that in mind. This is designed to be an immersive game, first of all. It's dark fantasy. It's low magic. In a game mechanic sense, it's actually high magic in a narrative sense. And I just want to explain what that means really quick. That means, so I guess the average is medium magic. That means there's not a lot of magical items or quantifiable magic bonuses and twinky things that your character has or can have. However, it's high magic in the sense that it is a Dark Ages setting, and a lot of people still see the gods in everything, and spirits and demons, and magic. Therefore, all of that is all magic, or it's all sorcery in a sense. Anything they don't understand. So, in that sense of it, in an immersive thematic sense, it's actually very high magic, or what I like to call low magic, high mysticism. Is probably what it is, if that makes any sense. So keep that in mind. So I guess the first thing is I'm trying to say here to keep it somewhat organized is the first thing with game mastering Savage Kingdoms is thematics. Make sure it's fairly dark. It doesn't have to be completely gloomy and negative and death and plague everywhere, but it is gritty and dark, and that's not always the meaning some people think. People, it's dark, it's evil, and everything's negative. It's like, no, it just means it's a little more severe. And when there is glimmers of hope, and there are bright lights in the setting, and there's some cultures are evolving into an age almost of chivalry and more acceptance and that kind of stuff. And that makes it all the more telling when that actually happens. Against a fairly dark backdrop otherwise. And I've always said that about magic or magical objects, magical items, enchanted items. When you finally get one, it's so much more interesting and magical or mystical that you have one, because you're in a setting that they're not all over the place. If you're in a setting where magic is so mundane, because those two terms are actually mutually exclusive, then it's really not magic at all. It's just the accepted norm. So, and again, that's not a knock against those kind of settings. That's fine. Some people like those, but I am speaking for Savage Kingdoms, and that's not how this is. There aren't +1 swords laying around and wand of cure light wounds. In fact, wands don't even really work that way in the system or setting. And swords certainly don't either. They may give you a mechanical bonus, as well they should. Even master-crafted objects do. But more importantly, there's going to be history to it, and there may even be some gaiuses laid upon it, or curses, or you might gain renown because you're the bearer of it. The sword itself may not even really do much except for look cool, and therefore give you a bonus in persuasion skills, or your renown because of the fact that you are carrying this cool looking thing. Maybe even the scabbard looks awesome. So yeah, stuff like that. So keep that in mind with the thematics. So it's dark fantasy and sword and sorcery, and I know I keep throwing those two terms together, but they're really sort of different. Sword and sorcery, of course, is the main term that Robert E. Howard, I don't think he coined it himself, but his reviewers often coined it as sword and sorcery. He's kind of the grandfather of it, and in case his name doesn't sound familiar, he is the creator of Conan the Cimmerian, or Conan the Barbarian, but he's really Conan the Cimmerian, from all the Conan sagas. If you haven't read the original sagas, you totally need to. Still the best. To me, Howard, and I'm being slightly biased as a fan of sword and sorcery, is the best short story writer, period. He's often contributed to be the best sword and sorcery writer, but I actually think, as far as short stories go, I think he's actually the best short story writer, honestly. And there's some really good ones out there. And it's incredible that he wrote all this stuff from the age of 18 to 28. I mean, a lot of his stuff, he was only like a kid. He was like 18 to 20. Most of his Conan stuff was written before he turned 24. They say he was starting to come back to it before he unfortunately ended his life at age 30, but most of that body of work, at least for Conan, was done by the age of 24, 25. Meaning that a lot of it was when he was 19 to 21. Cole was his earlier stuff, and you can kind of tell that an 18, 19-year-old wrote some of the Cole. A lot of it's good, but it's kind of, there's some kiddie, or you can tell that an 18-year-old wrote it. And then Conan gets a little more. The Conan stuff gets a little more mature, and there's a little more skill to it. Anyway, sorry about that tangent. Just want to tell you where, in case you don't know, that's where Sword and Sorcery comes from. So using those thematics. Howard's world, the Hyborian Age, or some people call it Hyboria, which is technically incorrect. That's really just refers to the north. But anyway, the Hyborian Age, meld it with, a dark city, not necessarily sword and sorcery, but dark fantasy, which Game of Thrones, very hot right now. I even say it in the book. A good way to look at Savage Kingdoms, the setting, is Game of Thrones meets Conan the Cimmerian, and throw in some Lord of the Rings, of course, especially some of the grittier stuff. Not necessarily darker, but grittier, some of the Rohan stuff, and Gondor, and Numenoria, and Mordor, certainly. And, leave the Hobbit stuff out. As much as I love Hobbits in the story, we don't have them in Savage Kingdoms. So if you kind of take that out, because that's a little more whimsical, which is fine, that's what Tolkien was going for, then merge all that together, and that's pretty much the setting. So the first thing as a game master is Savage Kingdoms is try to make sure your thematics are straight on. They're dark, sword and sorcery. The people see gods everywhere. The very first part of the core rulebook actually goes over that, and I probably should have started there instead of back. Yeah, page 4. Themes in Savage Kingdoms. One theme is good versus evil, or the lack thereof. Meaning that, like most sword and sorcery, it's very gray. A lot of the characters tend to be amoral, not immoral, but amoral. They're out for themselves. Often their goals are gold and gems and glory, and that's fine. Hopefully, Savage Kingdoms, though, is going. You can go a little deeper with the character creation. There's all sorts of weaknesses and talents that can give you different aspects than others than just searching for gold and glory. You could be looking for political power, social power, magical power, just power in general, because all those often kind of feed each other, as does wealth. Or maybe you're trying to find a long-lost love, you're trying to carve out a kingdom for yourself, you're trying to lead the greatest mercenary army ever seen, whether it's with the Black Lions or one of your own. You want to sail beyond Ragnagard in the north to see if there's more to the world than to add to the knowledge of the known world. So it's obviously endless, like any game system, really. It's probably not that unusual, but the game is written to support those ideas specifically. Some other themes would be, let's see, that was good versus evil is the theme, or lack thereof, as I call it. Next is barbarism versus civilization. Again, this is all thematics. And that touches on, it's another very big Conan, Robert E. Howard theme, is that he glorifies barbarism somewhat, not more than, I think not as much as some people claim that he does, because he also does show that it can be dark and brutal and kind of backwards at times. But there are certain cultures, and Cimmerians to some extent are one of them, as well as the Nordheimer, that show the noble savage of the barbarian, that they live in this visceral sort of grim society, but when it comes down to it, they have a good heart. They make the right choices for not only for personal honor, but for honor of clan and tribe, and to continue the existence of that tribe. That's why they work together to help each other, and they make oath bonds with each other. And then often he shows civility or civilization being decadent and corrupt, particularly in the southern and eastern realms in the Hyborian Age. And in Savage Kingdoms, that's kind of there too a little bit. Although in the West there's plenty of decadences too, like decadence as well, like the Laurentian Empire, parts of the Pridonian Islands, some of the city-states down there, Ismondos to some degree, Brythia to some degree, and that's in the north. Malovia, definitely, and that's also in the north. So yeah, so in other words, not all the decadent cultures are in the south or east in Savage Kingdoms. There are some northern and western ones as well. Um, anyway, that's one of the themes. However, I would say in Savage Kingdoms we try to balance a little more than Howard did, although Howard did some of that, meaning that not all civilization is horrible and decadent, and not all barbarians are noble. They can be brutal and backward, and civilization, especially when it's at its true height, its actual beacon of experience, can be very enlightening, and people are happy. There's low crime, and maybe it's fairly wealthy and prosperous, not only with money but with knowledge and art. And there are parts of the Larinthian and especially the Pridonian Empire that are very much like that. All right, so continuing on with thematics. Hopefully, I'm not going to drag this out too long. I apologize. The gods are everywhere, which I touched upon. The next theme. And that's pretty much what I just said. The gods are seen in everywhere, with a lot of the cultures. When there's a thunderstorm, the gods are angry, or the demon Azrakoth is rising again, or the old man in the mountain is displeased and requires a sacrifice, or someone must go and appease him, or something like that. People often refer to, are you traveling that way to the edge of the world, are you now? And they mean it. They're not like, that's far away, the edge of the world. They literally think that's probably the edge of at least their known world. The ocean probably goes off into nowhere. So that's basically the gods are everywhere, meaning that the supernatural is pretty much everywhere. And you don't have to get completely overboard with that, but definitely touch on it. And certain cultures and certain regions of the setting are more apt or lend themselves more to that approach, a thematic approach, than others, certainly. Next theme is might makes right. Like it says in the paragraph, is mainly a dark fantasy and sword sorcery setting, the might makes right mentality often, reading it in the half-light here, prevails in many parts of the known world. That is, those with the biggest weapons, the biggest brains, or the biggest treasure troves, or usually a little bit of all of those, tend to be the people in charge. So it's very much might makes right. How does the law get made? Why does the king's laws, why do they have to be followed? That's the law, you have to follow it. Well, why? What's the underscoring reason? Well, why is because the king's troops are going to come beat you down, or throw you in a prison and forget about you forever, or for a decade or two, or put you in some horrible slave pits, or sell you into slavery. So it's very much, and in our real society is that way too. While I break this horrible law, then the police arrest me or whatever, and I get sentenced. But it's probably in a more brutal and more immediate sense in this setting, and the laws may not always be fair. Of course, that's typically true, often the case in modern society too, sadly, but particularly probably in a Dark Ages fantasy setting. It's if King Numidides, from Conan's World, or let's use one of mine, this great high thane of Norland, named Ragnar the Red, comes to power, and he ousts all the other jarls in the area and becomes the over-jarl, or basically the king of Norland, or at least most of Norland. And then someone says, but Thane Sigmund had these other laws in place. Why do you ignore them? And because I say they're gone. How dare you question me? Off with the guy's head. So, so that's might makes right. Those in power and with the biggest weapons or the biggest armies or the cleverer schemers, those typically are people in charge. Now there are some cultures, for example, the emperor of the Larinthian Empire, Octavius V. He's the current emperor in the default starting time of the Savage Kingdoms of campaign, which is like 9 years after the Gorgon Wars, in this big cataclysm. Now his might makes right is his Praetorian Guard, is the Iron Legion, and all the conniving advisors and servants who serve him. So there are concentric layers of protection, and some of the priests of Argathon, the war god, and priests of Titherius with their wealth, all sort of support the emperor. Now there are some that secretly, and maybe not so secretly, plot against him, but for the most part, the emperor, who is not particularly powerful he himself, other than in name and title, he could probably be taken out by a fairly average character, or maybe a couple advancements of a character in a single combat or through an assassination or something. But his power, again, is through all of his support. And that's very indicative of how, real history went very often. You had your great warrior kings that were very powerful, and those typically were in your more barbaric realms, whereas your civilized realms typically could have like the soft-skinned guy ruling, because that was civilization. And preferably that was somebody really smart, but not always the case. Sometimes it was just all title, hereditary. Game of Thrones, Joffrey is a good example. This little spoiled boy who's clever to some degree, but not old enough and wise enough to get the greater schemes of what's going on, and not liked by hardly anyone, and ultimately was his demise. So that's Might Makes Right. So the next theme, let's see how long we're going here. A little over 21 minutes. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but thematics are very important, and this is about game mastering Savage Kingdoms. The next thing would be, Might Makes Right, is the fading of magic. And there's only like 2 more themes left anyway. Fading of magic, you see it in a lot of settings. I mean, this is not unique, particularly to Savage Kingdoms. Particularly Tolkien is probably the best example, is Middle-earth. Particularly in Lord of the Rings, well, even in Hobbit, because it's all in the Third Age, in the latter part of the Third Age, and that means that magic, as we decree it, as we simplify it with a single term, is fading from the world, and things associated with magic, magical things. The elves are leaving, they're going overseas, they're going to Valinor, they're leaving Middle-earth, they're leaving the mortal realms. Even the dwarves are hiding more and more in their halls of stone and not really getting out and seeking merchant crafts like they did, and alliances with other free peoples. So that's the fading of magic, things. And then when you see Gandalf, very powerful wizard, and of course those of you who know Tolkien well enough know he's not even a man. He's not an old man. He's over 3,000 years. He's actually a Maiar, or a Maya. Maiar is plural, sorry. A Maya, which is like a greater angel or a lesser god. So even his powers are diminished. Now, part of it is he's not really allowed to use overtly a lot of his mystical powers from Valinor in Middle-earth, but a lot of it is also because there's the resources aren't quite as there anymore as they once were in the Third Age. So that's known as the fading of magic from the world. So Savage Kingdom's theme has that too, probably not quite to that degree, but I do imply in like the timeline in the first part of the book, in the first 10 pages, and you'll see some other clues too throughout the core rule book, that some of the earlier ages were more mystical, when the Shi were more in power, the Fae folk before humans really came to kind of into their fold. Giants once walked the earth, and demons came from the netherworld more often, and so all these sort of magical, mystical creatures thrived in this primal, elemental setting of magic and what men would call sorcery nowadays, which was just a mere thought for them back then. So Savage Kingdoms, so fading of the magic too, and that's why, and that shows up in the game rules. That's why you have to make magical arts as a skill roll. In some game systems, particularly D&D, the spell just works, and the roll is the saving throw to resist it, if there's even one at all. Sometimes there's not, and that's all well and good. But in this system, because of the fading and imperfection, also known as the brokenness of creation, there is a chance that even a simple spell doesn't work if you critically fail, or just even fail. Don't roll well enough. If you critically fail, usually some really bad stuff happens. You can become tainted. You can acquire a madness or a deep obsession, or a phobia of something. It's all listed in the critical failure section of each spell listing as well. And that's why rituals are more important. A short ritual gives +5 to the magical art skill roll, and a long ritual grants +10. So, therefore, further ensuring, though not guaranteeing, that your spell works. And that is all simply because of the fading of magic in the current age. Magic requires a lot more concentration. It sometimes requires, particularly in rituals, material components, a bowl of water, a brazier of fire, a drop of blood, a bone, a skull, depending on what type of magic is being used, whether it's shadow or death or fire or water or air or whatever. So that's the fading of magic, and also how it's kind of represented with game mechanics as well. The last theme that I have is heroism versus passivity. And that's pretty standard in most settings, but basically, to give you a little more overview of what I'm talking about, I'm reading it real quick because I kind of forgot what I meant here, is that, alright, basically it's fate favors the foolish, or the brave, the foolhardy, I guess. Fate favors the foolhardy. So in other words, those who act with passion and with action, larger-than-life people generally succeed in the setting, and that's because most adventurers are cut from that cloth. Now, you could play a passive character, and that's fine. There are ways easily to do it, and I've seen one or two of them, and they've been very interesting. But in general, for the default reason of why you are this mysterious adventurer profession that's not really a profession, it's because you would be larger than life, you take life by the horns, you speak with passion, you do things with passion. And to put it more of a Dark Ages, almost real life spin to it, is, a lot of people back then didn't live past 25, 30, 35. If you did, you often made it actually till your 60s or 70s, but that's because you were able to, so far survive all the diseases and plagues and such. And so people realize that this literally could be your last day on this plane of existence, and so people tend to live a little faster and with more gusto and passion, because you very well could have died of some weird thing in the night, whether it's an assassination or a war or most likely a disease. If your child, if you had 10 children, 3 or 4 of them were probably doomed to die at, by age 5, and then another 2 or 3 by their being a teenage years. So that's what that means. Okay, so those were the thematics of Savage Kingdoms. Keeping all those in mind as a game master, just that stuff alone should at least give you a overview, more of a right brain sort of overview of how things narratively should go and how to create the atmosphere. Now, like I mentioned in my last, in the part 1 of the Art of GMing video, is that you have to use evocative terms when you game, and this is like the performance part of game mastering, because it's I think I said in the last video, some people, I want to GM, and I didn't realize that I don't feel like doing an accent, or I feel weird about that. It's like, well, it's kind of like accepting a job. If you accept a job as a waiter and then you decided that I don't like talking to people or touching food, then maybe you shouldn't have taken the job. That sounds kind of mean. I don't really mean it to be mean, but what I'm saying is that if you take the job or the position or duty as game master, then know that that's part of it. Part of it is performing and storytelling, and the other part is that I went over in the last video is stage managing, is all the sort of more left brain technical stuff, the rules and any props you want to use, music, the organization of stuff. The right brain stuff tends to be, like I said, more the performance and doing the strange accents and that sort of thing, and weaving things and evocative descriptions of things like the fog that lay over the mountain valley. And when you wake up in the morning, it looks good, and it will be a great day. So things like that. You don't have to be quite that cheesy or over the top. But some of it is good. And speaking as an actor, if you commit to what you're saying or doing, or whether it's a character or whether it's a crazy description of the morning or a combat or something, if you commit, or I prefer to say convict yourself to it, if you are convicted of it, you will sell it. You will sell it. It's what we call in acting, particularly in stage acting, having the audience on your side. If you get the audience on your side, meaning that if they're buying in what you're doing and they're going along with whatever crazy character you're doing, whether it's improv or a full scripted traditional play, if you have them on your side, you can get away with anything, just about anything. I mean, you could, I guess, technically bomb the rest of the show in Act 2 or something, but in general, they're on your side. And that is so liberating as a performer as well as a GM, because then you know that, hey, I got these guys on my side. We're friends in there. They're kind of with the journey with me. So let's do this. If you show yourself to be a little timid and you're like, well, I don't really like the guy wants to buy you a drink and he says he has a place on a ship leaving tomorrow and he could use more crew. That's kind of boring. Someone that's like that could make up for it by being awesome in every aspect of GMing and end up being a great GM. But that is one mark against you if you can't, at least break out of the shell a little bit, lower your inhibitions, as we call it. That's why a lot of actors, we do warm up, particularly we'll do improv exercises, just silly stuff to make you lower your inhibitions and make you think quickly and make you just forget about what anybody's thinking. Because again, if you convict yourself to being that crazy goat on stage, or the woman in drag, or the silly guy with a crazy accent, the audience will buy it. Even if they think it's silly, they'll think it's so awesome that you stayed in character and you committed to that thing the entire scene and didn't break character. Now, obviously, that's stage and film acting, and this is a game, so there is a disconnect. There's a little difference, but my point is if you use a lot of those performance art techniques into the performing as being a GM, a lot of it will translate, and you will have the people on your side. Now that's for live games, obviously. So when you're running Roll20, I actually just moved from where most of my players were in Atlanta. I moved up to Asheville, North Carolina, which isn't too far, to pursue some more acting, more performing arts, and also to move up here with my girlfriend. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's just some personal stuff. But the point is, I moved about 200 miles. Not that it's super far, but it's far enough from my main people that I gamed with, my main players. So now we play through Roll20, and I run several campaigns. I play tested Savage Kingdoms over Roll20. Roll20 is awesome. I know most of us know about it. Great. Try it out if you haven't. So in that venue, I typically run chat-only games, which is interesting as a performer, because you wouldn't think I'd want to do that. But I also like to write, and I like to write descriptively and stuff, as well as, and the other players are really good at it too. So sometimes those games, actually, I personally think most of the time, those games are more immersive because you're not having people crack up, or maybe they're not using a character voice, and sometimes you're a little confused about, did you say that in character or did you not? So when we do chat only and we're using quotes for when the character speaks and not otherwise, then it just, I don't know, it becomes a little more immersive. You can also compose your thoughts. The characters typically sound cooler that way. Does it run a little slower, but not overly so. So what I'm getting at is, and just to complete the video here, I'll just end with this last thing, some GMing notes about Roll20. If you're using camera, a lot of people use Google Hangouts or Skype. I find Google Hangouts to be, I'm not a big fan of Skype, but apparently it can work just as well. Coupled with Roll20 is like a screen share is a good way to do it. Then most of the stuff that I've said in the last video and this one pretty much plays. I mean, you're performing just like watching this video. You can do crazy hand gestures, and hey, the guy comes up to you and punches you, and my head goes to the side. you can still perform as if you're alive. Sure, you're in this little box, but in this two-dimensional box, but there's still audio and there's sound, and you can connect with different voices and that sort of thing. You can use different character voices. So all those performing arts things from a live game really translates into Roll20 when using video. However, like I said, I typically run my games chat only. Not always. I've done some live, video. It becomes a little different. So then your art of GMing is really more like a writer than a performer. However, a little tip and probably not even a tip because everybody probably does this naturally. You see it in your head. I mean, the story's playing out, and you're simply writing. Most good writers will tell you this. They're simply just writing. I think Stephen King is one of the more, and Robert E. Howard too, was said he was just writing stuff that he was already there in his head. He was just simply recording it. So approach it like that. As you're writing, as you're describing what the characters see, don't forget to engage all the senses: smell, sight, taste, hearing, sixth sense even on occasion. It's really cool, especially in a high mysticism setting like this one. And there are talents like second sight that people literally do have a sixth sense, or someone who specializes in perception, empathy, or insight. So don't forget to engage the senses through description, just like a good writer would do. Use visceral terms, like instead of using the term hit and miss, which is used a lot in gaming, use connects or slashes or pounds or tears into or bleeds or cuts or slashes or slices, or brawls. Use words that bring to mind imagery. Hits doesn't really, what is that? Did I get drove into the mud, or did I just get my cloak got nicked? What's going on? Same with miss. It's good. I'm glad that he missed me, but I'd like to kind of see what happened. Did he duck underneath? So instead of misses, use ducks or dodges or sidesteps or steps away from. Parries. You can even use hard parry and soft parry. Those are swordsman's terms. Or deflects. Especially in Savage Kingdoms, because the damage system is the higher your attack roll over the defense, the better the hit is. So immediately from the result whether that person got pounded or slashed really good, minus any armor they might have immediately. I know in D&D I sometimes have this problem of getting ahead of myself. Somebody would roll 12 over the armor class, and I'd be like, oh yeah, you drill him, and then you roll damage, and you roll the minimum number, and you're like, actually, well, you thought you drilled him, and actually it was a glancing blow, or it turned off his armor, because of the two different rolls. I finally learned to just kind of wait to do the description after the damage roll. I don't know why it took me so long. But anyway, in Savage Kingdoms, because it is the one roll, you immediately can tell that, to help aid in your description what you might want to say. If somebody's hit for 15 points of health damage and they only have 20, obviously they got nailed. And then adjust your description based on the type of weapon. So if somebody slugs you with an axe, the GM probably shouldn't say, and you are pierced for 15 points of damage. It's like, no, it was an axe. You were slashed or cleaved. So just base it on the fighting style and the weapon style. An arrow, pierces and whistles and impales. A mace or a hammer bruises and smashes and crushes and shatters. And a fist does similar, but maybe don't make the words quite as heavy, because brawling damage typically doesn't do quite as much. Though there are certain talents and stuff you can do to make it all really as good. Just keep in mind the fighting style and even the attributes of the if you're describing a character with a 10 agility with a 23 dodge because of it, he's lightning fast. You can even describe that, you move even before the attacker commits because you're just so fast, or someone who's real slow but has great vigor or physique. They're just like the big boxer guys that just take a pounding and a pounding, but yet keep coming. So you can describe it like that. It's like, well, you connect again, but once again, it just seems to do very little to him. It just, it careens off his breastplate, or it cuts into his thigh, but for some reason, it doesn't seem to slow him very much. Yeah, so just like you would do in your verbal descriptions in Roll20 using chat only, make sure you type some of that. Don't spend a whole lot of time with it. I've learned, especially if you're running 3 or 4 players, because it is a slower medium somewhat. So you do have to be a little quick about it. One little tip too with that, instead of using huge blocks of type in a description, send little blocks at a time is what I do. And that way you can also cliffhang, something I like to do. You can, like I'll often describe something, I'll say, when you wake up the next morning, it dawns nicely on the new day. Even the weather itself is clear, and you begin hearing birds chattering off in the distance. All seems quite well as you break your fast and roll up your bedroll, and then I'll send that block of type and wait maybe 10 seconds. Someone may or may not respond. A player may say something. Regardless, and then I'll put until ... So now they're going, what is it? What the crap? That's a cliffhanger. And so then the next bit you can say roll perception, or and suddenly you hear a shrill shriek, several hundred paces to your left at the edge of the woods or whatever, or one of the horses suddenly rears. So anyway, those are just little techniques, as there are in performance art acting. So it is with the writing, and some of it correlates, anyway. But it is a different medium in the writing. So if you're using chat only, one thing is to keep in mind is to maybe do that short block, but also pace it. Don't do everything short. It's almost like monologue technique. When I teach monologue technique, I teach to deliver it differently. Otherwise, it becomes monotone technique. So if you have a whole block of a speech, a monologue you have to say, the idea is that you perform it differently, and that part of it you're going very fast and thoughtful, and you're going very quick and passionate. And other times you slow down, take a breath, pace it out again, and then reach another crescendo. So it should be with writing also. Maybe do a big block where an NPC spills something, or there's a big description, and then send a little block of text. And of course, all the while, don't forget that the characters are sending you stuff. They're responding to what you say, or they're creating their own impetus and waiting for you to describe on. But anyway, it's an art to learn. Chat, you just have to be pretty fast, and it helps to be obviously knowledgeable with the rules, to make a quick call, or at least just spend a quick moment to go, let me look that up in the heroic strength talent. Oh yeah, that's right. You need to, says you can lift over, cost you 3 stamina points, you can lift 4 times your weight over your, okay, cool. So yeah, just, try to be fairly quick about it. Because all the time on Roll20 are also, I like to use a fair amount, without overdoing, sound effects and music. Like I'll do wolf howls in the distance, or thunder if it's a bad day, weather, or if they're traveling near the river. I've got a river stream sound, I've got tavern music, and all that kind of stuff. When there's kind of a non-specific moment, or if we take a 5-minute break, I think I usually play the Game of Thrones music. I've got some other sort of epic, evocative music that will sort of run in the background during battle scenes, or during thoughtful scenes, or during a riddle scene. There might be mystical music, or if they're in a temple or a monastery. So anyway, alright, so this video is run at 44 minutes, a little bit longer as usual than I wanted to. So I will end here. But just in conclusion, so I went over the thematics of Savage Kingdoms, how to game master that, once you get that kind of in your head, and it's not that big of a deal. And some tips on how to run Savage Kingdoms on Roll20, especially with using chat. Wow. And I probably won't edit this, so that'll stay. Using chat only. And if you're using video, obviously pretty much the same performance skills really do apply, whether it's visual, audio-visual, or whether it's live. So keep that all in mind. I'll do a second video, I suppose. I need to learn to probably make these shorter, where I will go more into the chapter at the end of the core rulebook about game mastering SK. More specific stuff, as well as optional rules and just some little tips and tricks that you could use, not only to make the game more enjoyable for the players, but also for you, the game master. So, all right, well, thanks for bearing with me, everyone, and check out the last video and the one coming up. Pick up the core rulebook and SK Bestiary if you can, and the Savage East campaign expansion book is coming out soon, hopefully in the next month or two, probably more like 2 months. It's about 60 to 65% written, so pretty close to 100%. There'll obviously be some editing, throw some artwork in there, get the maps ready, and then we'll be ready. It's been kickstarted and backed by some backers, so that's awesome. They've got copies coming, and then hopefully I'll have that for sale, like the core rulebook, for sale on Drive-Thru-RPG, at bookstores, Amazon, etc. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and happy adventuring.